Just to go live. Okay, welcome to the first ever EdConnect Chats Vodcast episode. We're very lucky to be joined today by Alan Newland, who is the author of Becoming a Teacher, and we'll talk a bit more about this book later. But this is the first in a series of podcasts by EdConnect, the global grassroots education network for early career educators, as well as Early Career Media, an organisation specialising in producing media content such as podcasts for early career professionals in a range of sectors. So we're really pleased to be joined by Alan today. So thank you for giving us your time, Alan. So first question, Alan, for people who don't know you or do know you but don't know a lot about you, can you tell us who you are?
Yeah. So, as you say, my name is Alan Newland. I was in I'm more or less retired now, semi-retired, but I was in education for over 40 years, starting as a primary school teacher in Hackney way back in 1979, and had 20 odd years in schools in places like Hackney and Tottenham. Also trained teachers for about 5 years in the middle of that. Had a headship in Hackney, went to the Department for Education as an advisor, and then at the General Teaching Council. And I was with the General Teaching Council for some years before they abolished it, before the coalition government abolished it. Since then, I've been working more or less as a freelancer, lecturing trainees and students about professionalism and ethics in professions, particularly in the teaching profession, of course, and writing. So that's been an unexpected kind of late boost to my career. Actually, it's been fascinating. Yeah. So my background, I'm from Liverpool, but moved down to London as a student teacher and ended up staying there. Yeah, so that's me.
Fantastic, thank you. So you've had quite a varied career. You've had teaching, leadership, teacher training, some policy stuff. So quite a varied career. If you can think back to, because obviously a lot of people watching this will be in their early career. Some people may not have even started their journey into education yet. Thinking back to the 70s when you first started teaching, what was your early career like in education, and what golden nuggets have stayed with you through that whole time?
Well, I think I mean, I was always interested in politics, and now I look back at that late 70s, 80s period as a very tumultuous time politically. And it certainly was, or it felt like it in London as a teacher, and particularly in a place like Hackney. So I kind of look back now and remember some of the very controversial and very passionate debates, not just about education, but in the wider context as well. So, I was right in the middle of, and actually quite active in getting involved in things like the anti-apartheid movement, in supporting the miners' strike in the mid '80s, and things like that. And I thought, and still do, that teaching is not primarily a political activity, but you can't get away from the fact of the political dimensions to it. And I don't think teachers should try and get away from the political dimensions to it. They should be aware of it. I've never tried to push my politics onto kids, and I think that's inappropriate and wrong. But I always thought that it was very, an awareness of the wider political context is very important as a teacher, and as a new teacher as much as an experienced teacher. But just on that kind of ideological aspect to it, it was part of education as well, much more than it is now. And so I felt in those days that it was very important to be on one side or the other. You were either for comprehensive schools, or you were for grammar schools, or you were for what we called, real books, or you were for reading schemes, and there was no meeting of minds between the two. And now I look back and think that was wasted effort and kind of misguided. And I say that a little bit in the book, that teachers will do themselves a disservice and their kids a disservice if they get too deeply embedded in what they think are ideological issues. My experience is that some things work for some kids. Some things work in particular schools and particular areas better than they do in others, and not to be too kind of ideologically driven about the source of what works and what doesn't. So it was an interesting period to start teaching, the late 1970s. Margaret Thatcher had just come in, and of course she ended what was called the post-war consensus about education. And at the time, I regretted that. At the time, I saw the introduction of the national curriculum in 1988 as a retrogressive step, particularly for primary schools. I didn't think that it should be a subject-based national curriculum in primary, and I still don't, actually. But I think I distracted myself a lot with issues of politics and ideology, and didn't pay enough attention to developing the skills and the competencies around being a good teacher. And I was a good teacher, at least, people tell me that. My former pupils say that, get in touch with me and say, Mr. Newland, I love being in your class. It was great. So that's all was very nice. But I think I didn't develop my the kind of basic skills and competencies in the way that I should have paid attention to. And that takes time. It does. It takes a lot of time. Some people are naturally gifted and brilliant. Most of us, we just have to put, one brick at a time in place and build it up from there.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for that. I mean, like you said, there's obviously awareness of politics and government system and policy is really important. If you think like the work we're doing on curriculum now,
yeah,
it stemmed from the national curriculum being developed over when you go to university or teacher training, you learn about obviously how it's evolved and developed, and having an awareness it is really important. But like also it's really interesting, like you said, a bit of a distraction in some cases it can be, and that development of that sort of honing the craft of what makes a good teacher and having those early years to get it wrong and learn from the mistakes and take the risks as well, and each year that constantly evolving. So that's really interesting. So on to the next question then. What do you wish you'd known going into your education career? Because a lot of the content we provide at EdConnect is all for people who have just started, and there's lots of people sharing tips and tricks. So going in as a brand new teacher or going into your teacher training, what do you wish you'd have known before you'd started it?
Well, I think I wish I'd have known. I mean, I remember going to visit my old tutor. I did my PGCE at Goldsmiths College, and I remember going to see my old tutor and saying, "It's nothing like what you told us it was going to be like. It's so much harder than the impression you gave us." And of course, that's true. That there's nothing that can prepare you for really, what feels like the overwhelming introduction to your own class. But I think what I mean, it kind of links with the previous question, Ben. I think I wish I'd have known not only that it would get better and that I would build up skills, competencies, and confidence quite quickly. But there were times when I really did feel overwhelmed, and I wish I'd have known that would, I wish I'd have the confidence to feel that would pass quickly. And know that would pass quickly. But it's very difficult to tell new and young teachers that. I mean, lecture at universities and teacher training skits and what have you all around the country. And I do say that to people. It may feel overwhelming, and you may kind of even get depressed about how much work there always seems to be done. But it will get better. Now, they get told that all the time by their tutors and their mentors, but it doesn't really go in with a lot of people because they're just trying to cope with the day-to-day stuff that they have to do. So that's important to know, really, that you do build up lots of things that become routine, and then they're part of you as a teacher, and you're not having to kind of prepare for those anymore. And so experience is a wonderful thing. It really is a wonderful thing, because it's a treasure, isn't it? You've got it in your toolbox, and it's a treasure that you can kind of pick out and use intuitively and spontaneously. And they're the things that you don't have when you're new at anything, when you're not an expert, when you're not practiced and experienced. You just can't pull out those tools immediately. So everything seems overwhelming, and I wish I'd have known that earlier on in my career. I mean, I had a terrible year my first year. I mean, I start the book and I start my lectures with a very funny story. Excuse me, a very funny story about how taking my class out to the Natural History Museum in the first 6 weeks of my teaching career, my first year. And of course, in those days, you went out either with nobody or you went out with one or two people. I went out with a mum who was working part-time in the school, 30 kids on the tube right across London. Of course, what happens? We lose a kid on the London Underground. Now, I won't spoil the story, but it's, you would throw your hands up in horror at the prospect of that. But in fact, you meet any teacher, not of my age, any teacher who's been in the job for 10 years, and something similar has happened to all of them. But when you're first 6 weeks in teaching, you think it's the end of your career. And I had a series of disasters in my first year. Another quick one. The kids would not pay attention to the swimming instructor every Monday morning when we took them swimming. And he threatened them to, throw them out. And I threatened them to throw them out. They had to behave better and all the rest of it. And yet they came out every week, changed in the changing rooms and jumped straight in the swimming pool. And he would be the swimming instructor would be going mad at this. And I said to him, if they do that next week, I've warned them, if they do that next week, I'm going to pull them all out and take them back to school. Well, of course, next week, in spite of all the warnings, they did. And they jumped straight in the water. And I pulled them out and I said, get changed. We're going back to school. We get them back on the bus. And all the way back to school, that whole class were chanting, "We hate Newland. We hate Newland." And this was before Christmas. So, my first year in teaching was an absolute disaster. One catastrophic event after another. And yet I went on to have, a very successful and very satisfying career. So to any, trainee teachers, early career teachers out there who think they're having disasters, I can tell you that you will overcome them. You definitely overcome them, and you will put them behind you, and you will learn from your mistakes, and you will, learn from that experience. And I think, that's something to always remember.
Yeah, I think that's so true. That's something that I personally resonate with. I think when you're in that room, and often you're on your own, especially if you don't have like a teaching assistant, but especially more so if you're secondary. In primary, it's probably a little bit different. But yeah, you're the person that has to tell yourself you're doing a good job, even though you probably have had a rubbish day in some cases. that you're still having a good job, and to celebrate the really little wins that happen in the classroom every day, no matter how old the children are. So that's really great to hear from someone as experienced with you with the career you've had, that it's something I think we can all resonate with and make sure that we keep at like the forefront of our minds going into your education career. So thank you for that. I think that was great to share. So like we said at the beginning, you've written a book, okay? Becoming a Teacher, the legal, ethical and moral implications of entering society's most fundamental profession. So my next question is, because I first came across you when I was in my teacher training, when I was in my third, so I did a 3-year degree, and one of the CPD opportunities we had was our university had brought in some of your pre-recorded videos, and we watched them and went through and had some tasks to do around, you know, the legal, ethical and moral implications of being a teacher, and it was really interesting because I think personally there was things in there that I'd never thought of before, or there was things in there. There was maybe some myths that I'd heard or been told that the book. I was really pleased to see that, because I thought that was something that everyone would benefit from, because I know it's something that not all teacher training programs would touch on. So you've obviously, so I've got a few questions about this. So first of all, where did this sort of interest in the sort of legal and ethical side of teaching for you sort of begin?
Well, I went to the General Teaching Council, which had not long been formed. The General Teaching Council started work in about 2001 and was set up as a professional regulatory body for teaching. Now, it never really gained traction with the profession itself because, well, dare I say that the teacher unions didn't really kind of support it. I mean, they supported it officially, but they never really gave it, you know, their kind of warmth, because we were seen as a kind of another Ofsted, and we weren't really, because we dealt with cases of incompetence and misconduct, but we also had an advisory role. But primarily we were there to register and regulate the teaching profession in the public interest. And so a lot of people saw us as a kind of, you know, another stick to beat the teaching profession with. And I think that was a shame, because it wasn't really. But nevertheless, the role that we had was, one of the things that we did was to come up with a code of conduct and practice for teaching, and we'd never had one. And when I look back at my career, I thought, blimey, if I'd have known what was expected of me in the way that the teacher standards do now. But the teacher standards is kind of an interesting document to set out what's expected of you as a teacher, not just by your colleagues in the profession, but what's expected of us by the public. But it's quite an interesting and straightforward document. But the one that the GTC devised in the early 2000s was actually, I think, in many ways much more interesting, because it was much more kind of aspirational. I think the current teacher standards is a bit like, you mustn't do this and you mustn't do that, and you've got to try and do this, that, and the other. The one that was devised at the GTC in consultation with many thousands of teachers and others was to kind of be an aspirational document about what teachers should try to be. And so I think it was much more inspiring. But it made me realize that teachers never got chance, and I trained them for 5 or 6 years at a university in London, and we never talked about the kind of ethical professional aspects of life as a teacher, other than to refer to, you must be professional, you must behave professionally, you must be professional. In other words, referring to kind of rather vague notions of, working hard or being committed, but nothing specific. And so when challenges came along that were in a kind of gray area between, one's personal values and one's professional values, I don't think people really knew how to confront them. And so at the GTC, I kind of came up with this program to go out to early career teachers, to people training on university and skit courses, but also to talk to what were then called NQT conferences, to talk about the role of a professional body in promoting professional ethics and professional attitudes and defining what they were in things like codes of conduct and codes of practice. And to get people to think about, where's the balance between my personal values on the one hand and my professional values on the other? Do they always fit comfortably, or sometimes do they kind of rub up against each other and cause some tension? So in the talks that I do and in the book, I give lots of examples of where these things might come into tension. The personal values on the one hand and the professional values on the other, where they might come into some degree of tension. So I ask a question like, if you are a good teacher, what does it matter if you speed in your car at the weekend, or if you get drunk in pubs and clubs, in your own time? Or does it matter if you do things like, download or stream pornography, or, smoke weed in the privacy of your own home? Do these affect you as a teacher, or are they separate? And so I ask these questions, and I don't come up with any answers. I'm not being judgmental at all, either in the book or my lectures. It's just me asking questions of people so that they find their own position on where their personal values, what I call their morality, on the one hand, and their professional values and what I call their ethics on the other. And where they can kind of sit comfortably with both of those. And when challenges do come along, they can have a more confident answer about where they stand on that. And as I say, the teacher standards are a kind of useful way of giving us a scope of what our ethical standards should be. But they don't really give us any idea about how to tackle dilemmas around where our moral and personal values interact with our ethical and professional expectations. So that's what the book's trying to do. That's what my talks try to do. Get people to think and be more confident about where they situate themselves within that debate.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fantastic. And whilst you were doing that, I was flicking. Obviously, I've read most of the book, but flicking through it, and I think it is one of these books that you don't necessarily need to read cover to cover. You can dip in
Definitely
and out throughout.
Yeah.
And like you said, there's bits where you share elements of your own experiences. You provide the discussion and reflection opportunities. Like, so, one of the roles I have in my school is I'm the leader of personal development, which involves things like PSHE and things. And like one of the things we've looked at is how do you discuss things like discrimination and things. For us, I'm from Birmingham, and there's obviously things here like what were the events like the Birmingham LGBT school process take place, whose values should prevail, the schools or the parents, and those are really important things that you have to really consider, which you talked about earlier when you said about how your teacher training was very different to being a teacher. And I think we can all resonate with that, because there are some things that you just purely won't experience on a teacher training program, purely not because of anyone's fault, but purely because you can't, because you're not the teacher.
That's right.
And things like, especially when we're thinking of safeguarding and the issues that you talk about in your book, they will be the issues that come up where you think, oh goodness, how do I deal with this? What do I do? Oh, and then you can panic and that sort of thing. And actually, your book is structured in a way that talks about issues and values and how they might come up in the classroom, but then also your life as a teacher in general. So, I mean, you've answered part of this within that question sort of already. So how do you hope that this is used by new educators, your book? How do you hope that it would be used?
Well, in the way that you alluded to, Ben, that people pick it up and they look at a section and think that looks interesting. Let me have a look at that. I mean, I talk about the legal, ethical, and moral dimensions as kind of three separate categories. And so, if you're just interested in what's expected of you in terms of legal responsibilities and your legal, knowing what your legal authorities are as a teacher, you can just read that chapter. You can just read that section. There's enough of it, and there's enough questions to discuss. I mean, just for the viewers who don't know the book, the book is a bit like my talks. I make an input, and then I ask a question that you can, as a reader, you can think about or discuss. So either as a single reader, you can kind of stop and reflect on that, or if you're a tutor or a mentor, you can, do a kind of staff meeting or a development meeting where, you can read a section and then discuss it. And I ask some very specific, I think, very thought-provoking questions often. And as you say, they're not things that most people have time to ask on teacher training courses. So I hope that what the book does is give people a sense of, it develops their confidence really about things like, once you know the difference between legal, ethical, and moral aspects of your job, when challenges or dilemmas, whether you will know much more clearly where they fall and how to deal with them. So let me give you an example. After a session at a big university, well, it was Nottingham University, great big session, about 250 PGCEs there. And as often happens at the end of these sessions, a student will come down and ask me a question in confidence. And this was a young woman who said, she said, "Look, I've just been offered a permanent job, and I'm really excited about it. But my tutors told me I've got to give up the kind of part-time job I've been doing since I started university." She said, I model lingerie, and my tutor has said I'm going to have to give that up. And I don't really want to. It's quite lucrative. It's helped me pay my way through university in this course, and I enjoy it, and I don't really know what to do about that. What's your advice? So I said to her, well, look, why don't go through those three categories we've just talked about in the lecture. Legal, is it legal? Is it ethical? Is it moral? I said, so let's do it. I said, is modeling lingerie legal? And she said, yes. And I said, yeah, so that's dealt with right away, isn't it? You're not doing anything illegal, so that's not a problem from any kind of legal aspect. I said, is it ethical? And she said, well, and she thought about it for a minute. And she said, well, I can't see that it's in any way unethical because one, it doesn't interfere with my planning or preparation. Doesn't interfere with my when I was on teaching practice. I do it at weekends or occasional evenings, and I would spend no more time modeling lingerie than I would if I was playing football or rugby or hockey or something. So, I don't think it is unethical. I said, okay. I said, so you're confident that when you start full-time work, that modeling lingerie won't get in the way of your career as a teacher? She said, yeah, I'm confident it won't. I said, great. So that's dealt with the ethical implications of it. I said, what about the moral implications? I said, is modeling lingerie a moral or an immoral activity? And she said, well, it's not immoral to me. And I said, no. I said, now there's the rub. I said, it's not immoral to you. I said, it's not immoral to me. I said, first of all, are we talking about modeling lingerie, or are we talking about any kind of, soft porn stuff? She said, no, it's modeling lingerie. It's a well-known brand. I said, okay. I said, so whether somebody thinks that's an appropriate thing for a teacher to do is going to vary from person to person. I don't think it's inappropriate. You don't. I said, but you might find some colleagues, some parents who think, you know, should my 7-year-old daughter's teacher be modeling lingerie? Some kids might discover you on a website. Are you going to be confident about facing down any kind of snide remarks or sniggering jokes that people may make? And she said, yeah, I am confident about it. I said, well, then you're going to be a fantastic teacher. I said, but if I was you, I'd go to your head and I would tell your new head that you model lingerie and that you don't want to give it up, and for the reasons that you've explained to me. And now, if your head says, well, I'm sorry, but that's not consistent with the values or the ethos of our school, then in time, you may find it better to move to a school where the kind of moral values of the school fit with your own moral values. But you can't legislate for other people's morality. Everybody's going to have a different morality. And once they know about something that's going on in your private life, they're going to make a judgment about it. And you're going to have to be prepared to face down that judgment or to amend your lifestyle. But there's a good example, which happens very often in my sessions, where people are challenged by something, but having that legal, ethical, and moral distinction there helps them sort out that problem. And I think that's what the book does in droves, really. And it discusses a whole range of issues like identity politics, about British value, the reference to British values in the teacher standards. That's a big topic in all my lectures. Everybody wants to talk about that issue in the teacher standards. And so I think my book really kind of helps people sort out where they stand with it, and hopefully makes them more confident going into their careers as their early careers as a teacher.
Yeah, I think I totally agree. I think, like you said with that example there, where you coach someone through those 3 steps, that you doing that with someone, actually the book allows you to do that with yourself and really reflect. And like you said, the importance of the considering of other points of view from other people is the thing. Like, you might not see it as unethical or so on, or immoral, but actually other people could. And I think that's one thing a lot of people are aware of, but actually your book provides a bit more substance for that, and a bit more
I hope so,
policy and legislation and so on for it. So for anyone watching, I totally recommend getting this book. We will put the link in the description and everything, so that you can where to find it. So I know you sort of said at the beginning of when we asked who you are, because we're coming to the end of this fantastic first episode to do. You said you're pretty much retired now, but you still do lots of training. So what are you currently doing? What's your current the current works you're working on? Obviously, you've just finished this book, which I can appreciate took a lot of time. Obviously,
well, because COVID came along at the right moment for that.
For that. So what are you currently working on?
Well, I'm getting invited now that COVID is in a different place. I'm now getting invitations to go back and do live face-to-face sessions at skits and universities, which I'm very happy to do. Though, as you referred to, I put those lectures online, and people are still using them because they can do it much more flexibly than a live face-to-face session. So I did a session in Birmingham yesterday, actually, and I'm doing another live face-to-face session in Lincoln on Monday. So they're coming back. But actually, it was the thing I'm working on most at the moment is an idea that came from an early career teacher. Because when I wrote I think I'd got to about the second or the third draft of the book when it was looking more or less in shape. I went onto Twitter, on LinkedIn, and I said, are there any early career teachers out there, or students in their final year, who would be interested in reading the final draft of my book? And I got a really great response from that. And some of the feedback was really fantastic in revising and making me reflect on, what things had come over well and what things needed amending. But one early career teacher said, I really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed reading the stories. They were very funny. It made you very vulnerable. And it reminded me of the writing of James Herriot. Now, for those who are not familiar with the writing of James Herriot, he wrote all the stories about the vet in Yorkshire. They've been retelevised by Channel 5, but they were made a long series by the BBC in the 1970s. And they're very funny stories about a vet's life in Yorkshire. And I thought, there's an idea there. Because, of course, in the book I've written, I've just kept to the relevant stories about legal, ethical, moral. I haven't told all the other hundreds of stories I had about, that were also funny, that also give a kind of illustration of what life is like as a teacher, and that people would enjoy reading. So I thought, well, there's an idea there. So actually, I kind of started planning it out, and I could see that there are three distinct periods of my career as a teacher that I could write a book about each. So I've got a plan now for 3 books, and I've just finished the third draft of the first book, so it's ready more or less to send to a publisher to say, well, what do you think about this? Is this something that you'd be interested in publishing? Do you think there's a market for it? And I've got ideas for 2 more. So that's going to keep me busy for a few years, I think, if a publisher wants to follow that up. But it's great fun. So you've got an audience here of teachers who, I always say to young teachers, I never regret going into teaching, for the very reason that I made lots of great friends and made great, relationships in teaching. But you also come out of it with a lot of memories and a lot of stories. And of course, being at kind of retirement age, I meet with my friends who've gone into journalism or the civil service or the media or into business. And I meet with them now, and often they'll say to me, do you know, Al, you made the right choice in many ways. I've made a lot more money than you have, but you've come out with relationships, enduring friendships, and lots of memories and lots of stories. And it's funny how that seems to be when they get. It is a very rewarding career, but you have to look at the big picture and the long term. Not it's not always rewarding every day or every week or every term, but look at the big picture.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that importance that you just summarised there, that teaching's all about relationships. It's all about relationship.
Did you get that, Ben? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Just cut out a little bit, but I can hear you now. Teaching is all about relationships. Working in schools, all about relationships with children, staff, parents. So the final question then: what is your one top tip for any new educator? I'm not sure if you're still there, Alan, or whether it's cut out. Okay, we'll wait to see if Alan can rejoin us for his last question, but I'm sure most of you who've been listening and watching this back will agree that it's been a fantastic conversation that we've had with Alan so far. As our first ever one. So whilst we're just waiting for Alan to reconnect, we'll just go through that you can follow Alan on Twitter and Instagram at New Teachers Talk, and also his website www.newteacherstalk.com, and you'll be able to see a whole raft of information resources there. Obviously, the book Becoming a Teacher, the legal, ethical and moral implications of entering society's most fundamental profession, is a really, really good read. Like we said in the interview there, it is one of these books that you can just dip in and out of. You don't have to buy it and read it from cover to cover. Obviously, by all means you can, but it is something that you can read from dip in and out throughout. And it's probably something I'd advise, not just new teachers getting, but teacher trainers, mentors, universities, skit leads, so on, to get them. Now, I'm not sure if we're going to get Alan back or not, but if we don't, obviously, it's a shame that he's not there virtually to thank him. He has just gone off, so he may rejoin us. But Alan, as you can see, has had a fantastic career in education. This morning, he's agreed to come on to this vodcast. He hasn't been paid to do any of this, hasn't been paid to say any of this, and neither have we. So those of us producing this is all free content for people who follow Early Career Media and EdConnect. If you do want to get involved with EdConnect, and Alan's just rejoined, so we'll just add him back in. Hello, Alan. Can you hear me?
I'm not sure. Hi. Sorry, I don't know what's happened.
No, I think we just cut
sitting
out
right next to the Wi-Fi router, but I don't know what happened there. So
no,
my apologies.
No problem at all. We were just saying, that last question that you answered there just showed the importance that teaching and working in schools and education, it's all about relationships, whether that be with children, parents, staff, and actually, the great.
So my apologies, Ben. I don't know what the problem is. I'm right next to the Wi-Fi router, but yeah.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? No, it seems like we're having technical difficulties with Alan. So what I think we'll say, a huge thank you to Alan for joining us this morning. And what we'll do is his last question that we were going to ask him was, what is your one top tip for any new educator? So I will email Alan and ask him to share it with us. If you've joined us this morning, thank you so much. Obviously, it is the first one that we've ever done. Obviously, we did have some technical issues, but that's the way things work these days. But please feel free to comment below or contact us with any questions or any suggestions about how we can make this better, or any guests you would like us to interview. So thank you so much for joining us this morning for this first episode, and look forward to bringing you a new episode very soon.